We had some disastrous floods in 2022. Over 4,000 homes destroyed. About 444 people unfortunately lost their lives. So it was a big natural disaster in our city. We built a piece of tech that was helping with the immediate reactionary response. Life is hard for the majority of people. You're so focused on just putting out fires. So to build something preventatively can be a challenge when there's just so many fires to put out. What people loved about it was that it was built mid-crisis and then helped mid-crisis. So it was a very quick response. And I think people were also just proud that it was something that was locally built in Durban by Durbanites. We would have wanted more people to walk alongside us to build something sustainable going forward. But once the crisis stopped, then kind of all the attention dropped. And we were like, no, there's going to be more crises. Like we need more people to take this seriously, and we can build something that's going to help us. There was a nerve center that was set up by our government to deal with the crisis, and we were in communications with them a lot. It made its way to the president's office. We're going to get there.
That's amazing. This is amazing. It has such a great impact. My speaker today is Callum Oberholzer, a founder at Black Box Studios, a venture studio, and co-founder OpenSeat, a platform to connect people over food discussions and dining room tables. And he's also a former colleague of mine back from our agency days. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege.
Cool. So I understand you've got a bit of a story about a crisis mapping application. Can you give us a bit of a brief overview of that solution and how your team at Black Box built it and its primary purpose?
Yeah, definitely. The crisis map, just a brief overview. We had some really disastrous floods in 2022. It was a heavy topic. I mean, we had over 4,000 homes destroyed. I think there was about 444 people who unfortunately lost their lives. So it was a big natural disaster in our city. And essentially we built a piece of tech that was helping with the immediate reactionary response, both from a citizen, individual citizen response, as well as a nonprofit and government response. So we built a tool called the Crisis Map. It allowed people to log their needs in real time, and as well as allowed other people to log resources. And then you could go onto the map, you could see all these needs and resources, and you could decide who you wanted to help out. So we basically allowed people to get involved in the response.
Oh, so good. And what inspired you to create the application, and how did you come up with the idea?
Sure. We had done quite a bit of work in GIS before. I'd done a lot of work with a company, a nonprofit called Open Cities Labs, and they were working with quite a few municipalities building GIS applications. And we did a lot of visualization of data on maps, as well as charts and graphs and other data portals. And municipalities, always have a need for GIS systems. And so we had quite a good technical understanding of how to build these systems or interactive maps really quickly. A friend of mine, Nkululeko Ntembu, the director of a company called Pista, he had used previously the year before, he built a map using just Google Maps. So it was quite a rudimentary map that he was just plotting different incidences on when we had a period of unrest, which is known as the July riots, the Durban July riots, which was also another crazy time in the last 5 years. And that map was really well used by nonprofits, but it wasn't used by the broader public, so to speak. So nonprofits were using it to organize activities. And we came together and we were like, we can build something at scale really quickly for this situation. And so kind of took my knowledge and expertise from building GIS systems and his pre-existing concept that he had used, and we built something then together, which was then scalable.
How long did it take you to develop the initial version of the application? What was the development process like?
I remember it was a Monday afternoon. We were working on paid work, as one does, and in agency life, and it was raining outside our windows, and it was starting to flood in the streets. And it was about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon where we decided, let's down tools and let's build something, and let's just develop or program until we have a prototype nonstop. We'll take shifts. And so I had about 2-3 developers working with me at the time. I think it was 2, and then I was the third. And together with NK and then 1 or 2 others in my team, we basically took shifts and we designed something very rudimentary on Miro. I literally just designed it on Miro, and then we like tested it a bit ourselves, all while devs were actually starting to build this out. The first iteration we built in 24 hours. So we worked around the clock as a team. And then we had a crisis response WhatsApp group that we were a part of, that a bunch of other nonprofits were communicating and allocating resources through that WhatsApp group. And we were connected with an individual by the name of Russell Curtis, who did a bit of government work, and he was orchestrating a lot. And so he then sent out our tool as well to some of those people, and they tested it and they gave us some feedback. And then we took that feedback and implemented it over the next 12 hours and then finally released it to the public. So in total, it was about 36 hours using a WhatsApp group to test the concept. And then we released it onto Twitter, and at the time it was Twitter, and then a whole bunch of other different like response WhatsApp groups. And then it actually went viral in WhatsApp. So just many people were sharing it onto many different groups. And then when it went viral on Twitter, we also had some like slightly bigger tech names and personalities share it on Twitter. And that's how it got out essentially.
That's amazing. Such a fast development cycle as well.
Yeah.
So what technologies and platforms did you use to build it then?
Yeah. So I guess one of the core technologies would be the GIS library that we used, which is something called Leaflet.js, which uses maps from OpenStreetMap. And that would be like primarily the interface that you see and engage with. And then for the front end, we had a whole JavaScript framework. So it was React that we used for the front end. And then on the server, we had Express.js. And then we used Heroku and Postgres to host everything. So it's really scalable. And then, kind of at the click of a button, we could increase CPU resources, etc., or dynos. And so that was essentially our stack.
And what was the role of GIS technology in the application? How was that integrated?
So because a lot of infrastructure was broken, like not only did we want to get like a street address, we actually wanted a GPS coordinate to be on the map. And so Google Places, so like a combination of Google Places and then just using the device's access to GPS coordinates, which is allowed through like your web protocol. We were able to, upon confirmation, the user, as soon as they submitted their need, they could log their actual GPS coordinate and a street address. So for a search and rescue team, like if you needed an exact GPS coordinate, that would be there on the map for you. And then that would place a marker on the map, which anyone could see. And that marker would trigger like a little sidebar that came up with anything that the user had written about their request or their need. So you basically have hundreds of markers on the map, and you can click on each one of them and then you can see the needs of that individual. And if you are someone who's providing resource or care or assistance, we created just filters as well. So you could filter by the different types of needs like clothing or water or electricity or whatever it was. And then if your company had a particular type of resource, let's say you're a building company, you could go in and find the exact people that you could distribute building materials to, particularly for those who had collapsed walls and other types of infrastructural damage.
And going back to the technology, so the database technology for your projects, how did you choose that and how did it support your needs?
So I think because we were making decisions so quickly, we chose what we knew best. And so in that case, it was Postgres, an SQL relational database. And, maybe we could have gone with something like Firebase, but ultimately we stuck with Postgres because one, it worked really well with Heroku. And we knew that this product would have a future and that we wanted to build with that in mind. So we stuck with a relational database because, it can handle more complex queries and whatnot. And so that pretty much was a combination of what we knew best and had at the time. And then also, luckily for us, that was also something that would work quite well into the future.
All right. So what were some of the biggest technical challenges you faced during development?
I mean, I think we were caught by surprise at how quickly people started using this tool. I think like our first day, we had like maybe 100 users. And then by like the second and third day, it was spiking to 4,000 users. And we hadn't anticipated that. And we also hadn't anticipated how like some of the lower LSM communities would really adopt the technology, which is what we were hoping for. But I guess along with that, you've got lots of, much more, I guess, smaller, cheaper smartphone devices that we had to cater for and think about data and implications of people using mobile data who don't have a lot of access to mobile data a lot of the time. And so I think like there were quite a few instances of people just like sort of sharing phones and borrowing phones. And so what we had to work on pretty much was like page performance and optimization, like delivering those digital assets in a really light payload, which we couldn't like rebuild architecture at any one point. That was just a bit too tricky. So we just really focused on compression, and we then used a CDN called Cloudflare basically to compress whatever we could and try to make sure that in all our processes that when we were any of the just sort of stock standard layout assets were really well compressed as well. So that was pretty much the main hurdle that we had, was as things started to scale up, page speed started to drop, and like especially on your smaller, cheaper devices, like things started to get really clunky. And so we continually worked on, just trying to solve from a payload perspective.
Mm-hmm. So how did you handle integration of the various APIs, such as location services within the app?
Nothing too complex here. I think we just connected to Google Places API in React, and I think we were filtering and utilizing various parts of their services through quite a standard API connection. Yeah, I don't think there was anything complex there that we did.
Can you share any specific examples of problems you encountered and how you overcame them?
The first problem, which I think maybe we'll touch on a little bit later, was a bit of a philosophical dilemma about like making people's information public to the internet, and knowing very well that not everyone is obviously going. It's like when you release something into the ether, it's not like everyone's going to see it. But I think for us, we're giving away people's GPS coordinates, like even more accurate than their address, and then their mobile number, their name, and like these decisions were made like while we were hearing reports of people drowning and like literally having family members dug out, of the ground because of the collapsed buildings and whatnot, and so our mantra was, when you're in crisis, what do you need? Like, you need help here and now. And so we were like, this is going to be the digital sort of Mayday button, where you're just sticking your hand up and you're saying, I'm here, this is me, I need help. And so we took that into account, and we're like, let's make this thing as simple as possible. It needs to be the same as just hitting a button that shows people where you are so that you can be helped and potentially save a life. And then I guess when we thought about compliance with that from a privacy perspective, we just had to make sure, like, in order to be POPI compliant, which is the South African version of the GDPR, and they're quite similar in many respects. We had to have like a good privacy policy in place, and obviously we need to be like careful in terms of how we're storing people's data and who, and making sure that no one had access to that. And we did have government ask us for access to data, but which was only for peripheral data. So there was like, we had to be careful of that and what type of data that we had made available. And so we made basically very peripheral data available to government agencies to help with the rescue work. And then, and so I guess we ended up deciding, okay, we were POPI compliant, had that in check, and then we just made sure explicitly that people knew that whenever they were submitting on the map, that this was going to be publicly available. So that was the checkbox there that was very explicit about that particular submission. And I think lucky for us, like, we had no nefarious results that came from this. There were no like reports of someone abusing the system, etc., which was cool. And I think it was because it was the macro environment was crisis. So people were all engaging, trying to help. I think if this sort of thing were to be utilized en masse outside of crisis, then, your various actors and players would try and abuse the system. So that's why going forward, we're going to be building something substantially more robust. Because we've, I guess, worked with data companies, and a lot of, previous projects as a company had been, we worked on a health project for like a morgue facility. It was collecting data on post-mortem patients. And so we've had experience working with sensitive data before. And so we have basically a legal team that we work with, and they helped us put together a good privacy policy in terms and conditions. And then we just made sure that we stuck to our security protocols on how we handle, like internal keys and passwords and whatnot, making sure that we kept to like best practices with how we transport and communicate those types of things internally as a team. And then, from an external perspective, making sure that we had the right security protocols like built into our technical infrastructure with the SSL certificates, and just making sure that everything was going through HTTPS encryption, and that our APIs were secure. Obviously, Heroku and Postgres are industry standard in terms of storing personal information. And and then we integrated Cloudflare just to proxy all those different protocols, as well as protect us against any potential DDoS attacks, or even just too many people using it at the same time, and work compression and performance. So that's pretty much how we handle that.
Sounds like a good setup. So how did you decide then which features to prioritize in the initial application?
Yeah, I think it went back to our whole this is a Mayday button, and anything that distracts you from that big red button shouldn't be there. But unfortunately we had to have two buttons, which was just also we realized that a lot of people using our application wouldn't necessarily be first language English speakers. And so there was two buttons that said, I need help, or I can help. And then you basically clicked on one of those, a little sidebar popped up, you filled in why you needed help and what it was, and then you submitted. So it was, if you think about it, there were 2 clicks in that process for a submission. Maybe 3 if you include the checkbox for the privacy policy. And so we just kept it at that. And then anything, that was like our central journey, or our critical path, so to speak, for users. And then we applied just the filtering. And we wanted to just keep it as simple as that. So the filtering was there mostly for organizations that were wanting to categorize the data and kind of know where to assist or send their teams. But yeah, then we just kept it at that. But now, going forward, the project has received funding, and we're working with a sort of a health team from abroad. And there we're going to integrate, like we said, a much more robust product, which will also utilize WhatsApp and WhatsApp bots to collect information from communities, and then we'll aggregate data and help nonprofits organize themselves by being able to view what's happening in what community, where they need help, who's working here, who's working there, etc. So that'll be a different story.
Back on the prioritizing the features, can you share any examples of any tough decisions you had to make during, which features to include or exclude? Like you mentioned, you only had 36 hours.
It was like, what categories do you include? Because we were categorizing the needs. And so I think we had to, there's so many different needs that people have in any crisis and in any day. And so we eventually just stuck to, there was a broad 10 that we ended up coming up with. 3 primary categories which we decided to stick with, which was your need, your resource, and then whether your need was assisted. Basically, you had a red dot, a green dot, or a red dot that went blue and it was assisted. And then I'm trying to think, there wasn't actually, because everything was so intense and it was being used so quickly, it wasn't a lot of time for debate and ideation. And most of it, we just decided once it was up and once it was running, we were like, okay, cool, this is working. Let's just get it out there. And we literally once it was stable, we just focused on getting it out. And then we were doing a bit of server tweaking and whatnot, not actually releasing too many new features, because it was only about a 2 to 3 week window period where it was actually really utilized.
You mentioned it went viral on Twitter and WhatsApp, but how did the users actually receive the application? What was the impact?
It was amazing. We were interviewed on TV and radio. And I think what people loved about it was that it was built mid-crisis and then helped mid-crisis. So it was a very quick response. And I think people were also just proud that it was something that was locally built, in Durban by Durbanites. And it wasn't like we were being helped from outside necessarily. Not that that's a bad thing. But the response was really positive. And we would have wanted more people to walk alongside us to build something sustainable going forward. But once the crisis stopped, then kind of all the attention dropped. And we were like, no, there's going to be more crises. Like, we need more people to like take this seriously, and we can build something that's going to help us. But the problem is like, because of the South African context and just life is hard for the majority of people, you're so focused on just putting out fires, particularly your nonprofits and your other organizations and your government. And so to build something preventatively for the future, like, can be a challenge when there's just so many fires to put out. But we're going to get there, I'm confident. So, yeah.
And did you get any interest from the government or any other organizations?
Yeah, we did. So the tool was actually, like I said, we shared sort of non-personal information or data with government agencies to help them, particularly with like geolocating specific issues like water issues in this particular town versus electricity issues in this particular region. And there was a nerve center that was set up by our government to deal with the crisis. And we were in communications with them a lot. And another organization, I don't know what I'd call it, a collective called Cocta. Our application was basically sent to like on a local government level, right the way to a national government level. And then we were told that it made its way to the president's office, or just the presidency itself as a department. But we were dealing primarily with the provincial and local government.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. It has such a great impact.
There was... Sorry, I mentioned government, but there was also a nonprofit called Heal Our Land that they had been set up from the previous year's riots that had happened. And they're basically this nonprofit that has a network across the country that were able to distribute sort of primary resources in moments of crisis. And they then actually used the map to distribute food that was being trucked from Johannesburg, which is about 6 hours away. And they distributed 600 tons of food to 52,000 people using all the different coordinates and needs on the map, which is really cool. So I just thought I'd share that story and shout out to Heal Our Land. Yeah, so those are some pretty big numbers. Like when you think about like 52,000 people and how do you know where all those 52,000 people are? I think that was, I guess, the cool story.
So moving back over to the technical side, so what performance optimization techniques did you employ to maintain responsiveness?
Yeah, so I think like we always try to build and design with performance in mind from the beginning, at an architectural level, and then just in terms of like our static assets that we deliver on the application. But outside of that, like we would have, all our imagery and various assets compressed like straight off the actual server, but then we used Cloudflare the most to compress everything. So we were compressing like our JavaScript, our CSS, HTML, images, everything was compressed through Cloudflare. And that made a huge difference. And like our Lighthouse scores were performing pretty well. So that was our main sort of strategy.
We've kind of covered a bit about the privacy of data already, but how did you ensure the security of the application?
Mostly it was just making sure that we had industry standard security protocols on a technical level, on an internal operational level, and then trying to beef that up by proxying everything through CloudFront was how we achieved that.
So what key lessons did you learn from developing and deploying the application?
The number one lesson was deploy to the public quicker than you would like to, because they're going to validate your assumptions and your insights really fast. And so we had like just a stream of requests and insights that were coming in after we deployed, and rather than sitting on it. So it was a real like MVP prototype. that we tested and were able to iterate on. So that was our biggest lesson, was like, don't sit with it for too long in the design phase, get it out there, iterate quickly. And I know that's dependent on like the level of risk involved and what project you're actually building. But that was a key learning for us in this case.
That's brilliant. And can you elaborate on the importance of testing and how you used your user feedback for your iterative releases?
Yeah, so I think like we knew the problem very well. And we also knew the users very well because we had actually been working with organizations prior to this who were dealing with the same problem. So that Hila Land company that I mentioned, we were actually working on a project with them prior to this. And so we had I think a key component to all of this was that we were networked within this type of space, within crisis relief. And so we had all the right partners close by. So we were operating in a space which we were very familiar with. And we knew the users well, the people that were going to use it, and like what their operations were like from a company nonprofit perspective. But then we also had a really good understanding of people on the ground. Like our team itself was very diverse in terms of race and gender, and also in terms of skills and expertise. And so that, I guess, allowed us to understand a lot more about the context that we were operating in. And then, so we had, we were well placed right off the bat. And then the whole thing was getting feedback and implementing feedback as quick as possible. And that's where that initial crisis response WhatsApp group was so useful, because we sent it out there and there were maybe like a small sample group of 15, 20 people that were tested out and sent us feedback. So it was a nice, you don't want to send it out to the public immediately. So that sample group was really beneficial that we had. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And you mentioned there was some future plans for the application. Can you give us a bit of an idea of the roadmap there? What sort of features you're adding?
Yeah. So like if this tool, we're calling this tool, it was the go-kart of, what needed to carry people through a crisis. And I think now we're wanting to build the Hilux or the Land Rover, so to speak, just a lot more sustainable and robust and built for purpose. And the tool got some attention of some health researchers that are orchestrating a research project on extreme weather events and how they impact health systems, particularly in developing countries. And this group organized a workshop in Johannesburg where someone mentioned our map to them and made contact with us. And subsequently, their grant application to it's basically a British funder from the British government invested in health has funded their grant, and we are part of that project team now. And through that, they're allowing us to build out this crisis map into what we're calling a community resilience map. So we're focusing on being preventative, and we're building out. The integration is basically going to change now in the sense that we're using WhatsApp bots to collect sort of voices from the ground. And then we're building an intermediary application, which is going to analyze the needs coming from those WhatsApp bots and that data and displaying that visually on a map, but as well as it's going to allow organizations to create their own profiles and to then engage in threads with the needs that are coming up from the community. And those threads are available for anyone who's registered to see. So one of the big issues that we're trying to tackle is when there's a crisis, there's disorganization in terms of the relief, particularly if multiple parties are involved. So what this tool is going to do is it will allow anyone who's engaging in the relief effort to kind of see where one another is and who's involved in what, as well as then reporting on their efforts. So, and then ideally we want to be able to so there's going to be, you can see all the different needs coming up on the platform from the WhatsApp bots, from communities. You can then have direct access to people that have submitted needs through the WhatsApp bots, and your organization can go and assist. As well as going forward, anyone who's used the WhatsApp will also have access to like media and other resources from the platform to further educate themselves about the particular situation. that they may be in. And then we're wanting to bring in a third user, which is donors and funders, who would be able to see the activities and the performance, so to speak, of their beneficiaries that are working in all these different areas, with reporting available to them. So that's the basis of what we're building. And then there's a health module that we're also building on top of that, which is very specific to the project we're involved with. And I can give links, actually, if there's any show notes or whatnot. It's called Project Astra. I'll find out if I'm allowed to say that or not. I think I am now. But it's called Project Astra, and the fund is the NHIR, and with the University of Sussex that has kind of put this all together. And yeah, the health module is going to actually give, we're working on giving people updates from like health nodes or clinics or hospitals in the area. So people should be able to see the status, which is the closest health node to them, and then what's the status of that particular health facility during a natural disaster.
That's so amazing. Good story. So it's just talking about cloud native technology. So how did they help with that rapid development of the application?
Yeah, sheesh. I would say like Heroku was awesome in this scenario. And I think like Leaflet as well. I mean, open source, like we were able to just build that stuff so quickly and scale it so quickly. I mean, from going from like 100 users a day to 4,000 users a day. And all that was a slight adjustment in our bill from Heroku. And we could just scale up instantly without having to write any code. It's a game changer. And I would say like also kudos to Cloudflare, like being able to help us with those compression issues, in real time, on the fly, activating different compressions. Without those technologies, we would have, if this was like built somewhere on a local server, it would have taken us probably, as things were scaling, we'd have to probably like shut down for a day. And then people would have been upset, wouldn't have used the tool, and the whole thing wouldn't have worked. It was definitely because of cloud computing that we were able to do what we did.
That's brilliant. And any advice for developers using those tools to leverage cloud native in their projects?
Yeah, I would say understand what's out there. Like have a good broad understanding of all the various tools that are available in the various ecosystems. And then just choose one and get to know that particular ecosystem really well, so that you can work with it fast. Because I think that was the game changer for us, was being able to, we knew our toolkit and we were able to work with it really quickly in a moment where we knew the context well. And so it's not like these things just happen overnight. We had been a development company for 4 years already. And so the more you work at these things, the more these types of opportunities make themselves available. That would be my advice, is know your ecosystem, know your tools.
Yeah. And I suppose in your specific crisis response application scenario, the benefit of those cloud native architectures was the speed, essentially. It was how quickly you could get things online and up and running.
Yep.
Were there any challenges with the cloud native architectures, or was it all smooth sailing?
The only challenge we had was with the more cheaper smartphone devices struggling when there were hundreds of markers on the map. Because each marker has, a few kilobytes, and then suddenly you've got hundreds of these things that are overlaying. And I think just from like the graphical processing of these really small devices, that became a little bit of a problem with how we had set up the GIS system in Leaflet. Like ideally, if we had a bit more time, we would have used maybe one of Google Maps APIs and their ability to cluster markers that then break down and combine according to whatever view you're at. We had a slightly more rudimentary approach initially. I think Leaflet might even offer that as well, but that was probably the only challenge that we had, but it wasn't a deal breaker.
Yeah.
And I think we got around it by just trying to further compress everything and just make sure, even though there was a lot of stuff being loaded on your page, that it was as light as possible.
Yeah. Well, I think it was an incredible result for 36 hours. I mean, on deadlines. So what are some of the best practices you'd say for rapidly deploying and developing cloud native applications?
Yeah, I kind of think of it in at least two steps. The first one is like you want to be in in a context that you know well, like where you know the problem, you know the users, you know your toolkit, and that puts you in like, immediately in a really good place to create a solution that's impactful. And then the second thing is we are always getting it out sooner than later, which is something that everyone always speaks about. Lean startup methodology, all of this stuff is get the core essentials, what's really valuable, and get it in front of people. And then again, depending on the risk involved, like there's a whole sort of fail fast methodology, which can be a bit abusive, So like if you're failing at the expense of people. So I think like depending on the amount of risk you're taking, like you need to consider that into account. But I would say in general, it's don't leave your assumptions for too long. Like get them out, get them tested, get them stripped down or beefed up, get in front of people, and then iterate as fast as you can. So be open to people's feedback. Like feedback is a gift, and treat it like that. Iterate quickly. And I think, but also just be, when you're getting feedback, like you are going to be pulled in different directions. So there does need to be a core vision of the product and the strategy. And so that's something that like you if you're a founder or director, you have to control the narrative of the project or of the company or the product. Like you have to guard that narrative and be really clear on what that is and what it's trying to achieve, and then collect and iterate the feedback that's helping you get there. And at some points you might need to pivot, and then that narrative, the underlying vision can still say the same, but the strategy on how to get there changes. But yeah, that's how I would guide people releasing something.
So how can our audience get in contact with you if they want to?
Yeah. So you can go to black-box.io. Our website is there, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
We'll include a link in the description. Make sure they can find you.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. So that's all we have time for today. We'd love to hear more about how you're employing cloud and AI technologies at your organizations. Thanks to Callum for joining us today. It's been great to hear your story. Absolutely incredible story. And to get your thoughts on the development.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much.
And thanks to all our listeners out there. If you're thinking about using clouds, you can use Firney to secure up to a 10% discount off AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure Cloud Services. I'll leave a link in the description to that as well. If you'd like to see more content like this, then please do follow Firney on LinkedIn. And we hope to see everyone in the next one.
Awesome. Cheers, Mark. Thank you.